About Sweden. Everyone probably has heard of Stockholm Syndrome, when the hostages begin to sympathize with their captors. But far less known is its inverse mutation. Sweden has a rarer, morbid psychological affliction that we might call the Pyongyang Syndrome. It is when a well-fed, rational country voluntarily bonds with a government that hasn't paid its bills since the Carter administration. In 1974, North Korea imported 1,000 brand new classic Volvo 144 sedans from Sweden, and then simply never paid for them. Till now, Stockholm consistently sends polite invoices twice a year that Pyongyang purposefully ignores. The unpaid car bill only became one of many bizarre chapters in the surreal saga of the Swedish relationship with North Korea. This episode is about how one of the world's most transparent democracies voluntarily forged a truly bizarre relationship with the world's most secretive dictatorship. It's a story between idealism and deception, diplomacy and debt. How did these two utterly different societies end up in such a peculiar partnership? It's a tale of a honeymoon that led to a heist, a friendship that doubled as a farce, and a diplomatic bond unlike any other in the Cold War and beyond. But before the show, shout out to our glorious channel members. We will pay our gratitude back faster than those Volvo bills in Pyongyang. Thank you for sponsoring our production. Now, buckle up, let's dig in.
Norway and Sweden have provided around $4.8 million of humanitarian aid to North Korea this year. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, Finland provided aid worth $336,000 and Norway $432,000, while Sweden provided more than $4 million of aid. The countries made the donations.
Back to the beginning. Sweden's odd diplomatic flirtation with North Korea began in the early 1970s, a time when most Western countries were politely pretending the best Korea didn't exist. While the entire Western bloc clung to South Korea as a reliable trade partner, Sweden quietly veered off script. On April 7, 1973, Stockholm formally recognized North Korea, becoming one of the first Western nations to do so. It wasn't a diplomatic accident. This was peak Palme-era Sweden. Under the wise leadership of Prime Minister Olof Palme, Sweden was proudly neutral, morally upright, and deeply committed to believing that everything would work out after some good talks. While America got trapped in Vietnam and Moscow was busy being Moscow, Sweden chose a third path: to become an independent actor in this East-West divide and a vocal player in the non-aligned movement. By recognizing both Korean states, Sweden offered an open hand to Pyongyang and tried to ease the tensions of the Korean peninsula. To Sweden, this was noble diplomacy. To North Korea, it was a windfall. Suddenly, a democratic capitalist state was willing to call them equals, without demanding regime change, ideological reforms, or basic human decency. Pyongyang's foreign ministry, usually trained in the art of silence, unusually responded with friendly enthusiasm. What a diplomatic miracle! In the spring of 1973, North Korea's foreign minister formally accepted Sweden's proposal for diplomatic ties with warm words of friendship. It was a propaganda win for the kingdom. By 1975, Sweden became the first Western country to open its embassy in Pyongyang, and North Korea reciprocated with an embassy in Stockholm around the same time. A Nordic outpost in the Hermit Kingdom was born, inaugurating what seemed like a new era of East-West engagement. In those early years, it was a Cold War romance under an optimistic atmosphere. Swedish left-wing activists and diplomats viewing North Korea through somewhat rose-tinted glasses. Eager to see a socialist success story, independent of both Washington and Moscow, some Swedish visitors came back with remarkably glowing reports. Returning home, one Swedish delegation described North Korea to the media as a veritable heaven on earth. Others gushed about a socialist paradise, deeply moved by spotless hospitals, synchronized factory workers, and hand-picked children reciting flawless Korean-Swedish slogans. Distance turned out to lend a certain enchantment. Of course, the less one actually knew about North Korea's realities, the easier it was to imagine it as a utopia. This earnest fascination set the stage for Sweden's enthusiastic attempts to befriend and assist the Kims.
These houses with rooms of a heated floor are peculiar to the Korean architecture. This is the Kaesong dinner set, showing the Korean people's dyed customs. Korea is called the Golden Garden, as its people are so harmonious and its landscape so beautiful.
This wasn't purely ideological. Swedes were also ready to make profits there. It was the 1970s, when North Korea had a functioning economy, a gigantic infrastructure plan, and, more importantly, an untapped consumer market. Western businesses saw a golden opportunity. To Swedish exporters, it looked like a blank canvas begging for Volvo sedans and industrial pumps. Soon, major Swedish firms, Volvo, Kockums, Atlas Copco, and Alfa Laval, landed in Pyongyang with exhibition stands and charming optimism. The trade expo had the atmosphere of a Nordic hardware fair crossed with a diplomatic hallucination. The Swedes rolled out the red carpet, hoping to sell everything from mining equipment to passenger cars to this new market. North Korean officials, projecting confidence in their economic plans, expressed keen interest. Swedish salesmen tried not to ask questions about payment, since they presumed the DPRK state's credit would guarantee all purchases. With few other Western competitors on the scene, it appeared Sweden might gain a lucrative foothold behind the Iron Curtain. For a brief moment, it looked like a win-win. North Korea would get advanced machinery and technology to spur development, and Sweden's export industries would gain a new customer. What could go wrong? Swedish newspapers at the time proudly reported on the prospects of exporting modern Swedish craftsmanship to the land of morning calm. This was constructive engagement made real, commerce fostering friendship across ideological lines. Yet even amid the honeymoon goodwill, hints of trouble quietly appear. In 1976, Swedish authorities quietly discovered that North Korean diplomats in Western Europe had some side hustles. They were selling bootleg alcohol and duty-free cigarettes. By the mid-1970s, North Korea's embassies across Europe had quietly transformed into tax-free convenience stores with diplomatic immunity, and Stockholm was their biggest operations center. It was a helpful early lesson in cross-cultural misunderstanding. Sweden believed in transparency, trust, and legally binding contracts. North Korea believed in juche, strategic improvisation, and selling whiskey out of the embassy window. The ideological gap wasn't just wide, but also profitable.
From drug smuggling to dollar counterfeiting, moonshine. They would do anything without a second thought, as long as there is good money in it.
The friendly atmosphere culminated in one of the most outlandish trade deals, or say, car heist, in history. A deal that would soon be known as the infamous Volvo affair. In 1974, North Korea placed a dreamlike order. The shopping list included industrial machinery and 1,000 Volvo 144 sedans, altogether worth 700 million Swedish krona, about 80 million US dollars. To Stockholm, it was a breakthrough. Not only would their cars and equipment help develop North Korea's infrastructure, but they should pave the way for a long-term trade relationship. In a burst of enthusiasm and hubris, the Swedes agreed to extremely generous terms. No upfront payment, no deposit, no state-backed security, just goodwill and Pyongyang's faint promise. North Korea was essentially allowed to buy on credit, promising to pay later with the potential export earnings from minerals and consumer goods. Then, in good faith, Sweden proceeded to ship the goods. Hundreds of gleaming Volvo 144 sedans, boxy, reliable family cars, known for their durability, set sail for North Korea, along with shiploads of industrial equipment. One can imagine the spectacle when the Volvos arrived in North Korea's empty streets. Suddenly, Pyongyang had a fleet of brand new sky blue European cars rolling around. North Korean apparatchiks and drivers were reportedly delighted with these new automobiles, which were far sturdier than the Soviet-made Volga sedans they had been accustomed to. But any celebration was premature. Months passed after delivery, and North Korea failed to transfer any of its promised payments. Swedish suppliers sent polite reminders. Pyongyang stayed silent. As the months turned into years, it became clear that something was very clear. North Korea was ready to default on all payments. The 70 million invoice was being completely forgotten, perhaps even outright ignored from the start. The Swedish officials had to confront the ugly truth. They had been swindled. Soviet diplomats who witnessed the whole fiasco jokingly nicknamed the affair the largest car theft in human history. Never before has a nation acquired so many foreign-made cars for free through a single brazen move. The Volvo company itself, after fruitlessly waiting, wrote off the loss. Fortunately, Volvo's high-risk trading with the kingdom was insured by the Swedish government. And essentially, the Swedish people had to swallow the costs, compensating Volvo through its state-backed Export Credit Guarantee Board. In effect, the Swedish taxpayer footed the bill for North Korea's 1,000 Volvos. Swedish negotiators did make attempts to settle the debt. Delegations flew to Pyongyang to discuss payment schedules, only to be met with stone-faced evasions. North Korea's stance was unyielding. They had no intention nor ability to pay even one single krona. Some analysts believe Pyongyang was genuinely strapped for cash by the late 1970s, hit by falling commodity prices and cut-offs in Soviet aid. Others, however, argue that North Korea never intended to pay in the first place. The whole affair was a scam, exploiting the naivete of those silly rich Nordics. By then, North Korea embarked on a spree of buying from the West on credit and defaulted across the board when the bills came due. Sweden's case was just more visible. You know, the barefoot thief doesn't fear the man with shoes. Pyongyang had little to lose, and Stockholm had little leverage to force payment. So the 1,000 Swedish cars became permanent fixtures on North Korean roads, while the debt became a running joke. To this day, Sweden has never given up on recovering the money. The compounding interest has made the debt an astronomical number. That $70 million had swollen to over $330 million. Twice a year, like clockwork, the Swedish Export Credit Agency sends Pyongyang a formal reminder of the outstanding balance. And these reminders vanish into the void with no reply. Meanwhile, those hardy Volvo 144s kept cruising around the kingdom. For decades, they were among the only Western-made cars one could spot in North Korea, often assigned to duty as taxis or VIP transport. Visiting journalists in the 1980s recount being ferried at high speeds in boxy Volvo sedans along Pyongyang's nearly empty boulevards. The cars became part of the surreal backdrop of North Korean life. In October 2016, the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang even tweeted a photograph of one of these vintage Volvos still operating as a taxi in the city of Chongjin, with almost 500,000 kilometers on the odometer, still unpaid for by DPRK, as the caption noted dryly. The tweet is a perfect snapshot of the absurdity, quickly went viral. The Volvo heist, as it's now remembered, taught Sweden a painful lesson about doing business with Pyongyang. And Sweden wasn't the only victim. North Korea in the 1970s defaulted on a slew of European creditors. The Swiss government reported North Korea owing it $241 million for items like precision machinery and about 2,000 Rolex watches that Pyongyang acquired in 1976 without any payment. Finland had supplied North Korea with paper mill equipment, only to be stiffed on over 35 million of debt. Dozens of Western companies from France to Austria learned similar costly lessons. By the 1980s, North Korea had burned so many bridges in the world of trade and finance, reputed as the international financial black hole. In 1989, Pyongyang made a token payment on Sweden's debt, the first and last payment it ever made, and then fell silent forever. Yet remarkably, this grandiose scam did not spell the end of Sweden-North Korea relations. Despite being swindled and embarrassed, Sweden did not sever ties or retaliate in any tangible way. The embassy in Pyongyang stayed open, diplomats continued to talk, and a peculiar long game set in. The Swedes, licking their wounds, shifted their relationship from friends with profit to diplomatic partners.
The Volvo 144 Grand Lux, one of the fastest Volvos on the road. A new 130 horsepower engine with electronic fuel injection. Marvelous acceleration, even at high speeds. And that's just why the disc brakes have been made extra powerful. The safety must be equal.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. A country as smart as Sweden would not be fooled twice. Or will it? The Sweden-Korean friendship did not end with the Volvo affair, but developed into a stranger saga. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, North Korea's economy was on life support, and Sweden kept providing aid to the North Korean people. Swedish aid agencies and NGOs, often working through the United Nations World Food Programme and the Red Cross, sent food, medicine and supplies to help alleviate North Korea's severe famine in the late 90s. Even as North Korea owed Sweden hundreds of millions for those Volvos, Sweden was effectively giving millions more in free aid for the better health of the North Koreans. Diplomatically, Sweden became a rare window into the hermit kingdom for the West. It was the lone European outpost continuously operating in Pyongyang from 1975 onward. This gave Swedish diplomats a unique line of communication to the Kim regime. Over time, Sweden assumed an informal role as an intermediary and messenger between North Korea and the rest of the world. A milestone example of this came in 2001, when Sweden's Prime Minister Göran Persson paid an official visit to Pyongyang and cheered with our dear leader, becoming the first incumbent Western head of government ever to set foot in North Korea. Persson went as part of an EU delegation seeking to engage North Korea and candidly discuss topics like missile tests and human rights with Kim Jong-il. The scene unfolded in Pyongyang in a surreal setting. the rotund Swedish PM, more used to humdrum EU summitry, suddenly finding himself face to face with North Korea's reclusive dictator, a man Western tabloids caricatured as a cartoonish villain in platform shoes. Kim Jong-il, for his part, turned on the charm. At a palace in Pyongyang, he hosted Persson and the EU delegation for a marathon day of talks, 5 hours long, followed by an extravagant lunch banquet. The dear leader arrived in his signature Darb battlesuit, but any lack of style was compensated by over-the-top hospitality. At lunch, he enthusiastically clinked huge glasses of French red wine with Persson, with characteristic gusto. North Korea's supreme leader toasted the Swedish Prime Minister like an old friend, even as he delivered a diatribe about US President George W. Bush's hard line. In a frank but friendly tone, Kim vented that Washington's hostile stance was spoiling the North and South reconciliation, pointedly claiming the delay in inter-Korean talks was all because of Bush, not any fault of his. Persson listened politely as Kim Jong-il, a Burgundy connoisseur, kept the wine flowing. The European visitors nodding seriously amid toasts and quips, well aware of the bizarreness of the moment. Despite the pageantry, Persson did receive some concrete promises. Kim Jong-il agreed to extend North Korea's moratorium on long-range missile tests until 2003, reassuring the Europeans that he wouldn't fire off any rockets in the near term. He also reaffirmed his intention to hold a second summit with South Korea President Kim Dae-jung once the Americans got out of the way. Persson was handed an oral message from Kim to pass along to President Bush, signaling Pyongyang's willingness to continue dialogue with Washington, like a wayward kid slipping a note to the class teacher via the friendly Swedish kid. Persson later told the press that North Korea's words were welcome, but actions weigh heavier than words, against the idea of a premature celebration. Still, he was visibly pleased.
Above all, it gave us opportunity to make very clear the importance of the continuation of policy of reconciliation. And as I said, I will now go to Seoul, but we also expressed to the North side, and I said it yesterday during the press conference, I will repeat that.
After 2 whirlwind days on the Korean peninsula, Persson declared that we had hardly been able to go any further with North Korea. The only thing left would have been pinning down a date for that next inter-Korean summit. By Swedish standards, the mission was completed with a big success. As Kim Jong-il tossed to his Nordic friend, the accompanying journalists found themselves confined to their Pyongyang hotel under watchful guard, barred from exploring the city's streets. Persson, ever the tactful statesman, took great care not to publicly insult his host. South Korean reporters in Seoul peppered him with questions about Kim Jong-il's notorious personal quirks, his appearance, sanity, etc., hoping for a juicy quote on the mysterious great general with the weird fashion sense. But Persson demurred. He stressed that while he firmly opposes North Korea's system, he had nothing negative to say about Kim himself. In private, Persson did share his impressions. Kim, he observed, came across as well-read and lively and present, not at all the raving alcoholic madman many imagined. In fact, Persson later went on record debunking the wilder rumors about Kim Jong-il. He told Swedish media that all that talk that he's some kind of drugged-out porn addict who can't think straight, we can put that aside. The North Korean leader, in Person's view, was no buffoon, but a calculating dictator who knew exactly what he was doing. Unsurprisingly, Pyongyang's propagandists spun Person's courteous diplomacy into flattery. North Korean state media reported that Kim Jong-il had received lavish gifts from Person, and some months later an absurd ad appeared in random tabloids, claiming Person had praised Kim as a flawless leader and the most admirable leader he had ever met. Swedish officials immediately dismissed this as Pyongyang's fantasy and a part of Kim Jong-il's propaganda. Well, Comrade Person was merely being diplomatically polite. But in Kim's world, even faint praise was ripe for embellishment. Anyhow, North Korea's media adored Person's visit, while some Swedes cringed at images of their prime minister raising a glass with an infamous tyrant. Here was Sweden, a liberal Nordic democracy, earnestly trying to nudge a paranoid totalitarian regime toward openness, armed with nothing but goodwill and an EU mandate. And there was North Korea, master of the political stage, eagerly performing friendship while pocketing concessions. In retrospect, the 2001 Person-Kim meeting was a rare encounter of two very different realities, yielding a mix of progress and propaganda.
Lively, open discussion between politicians with different backgrounds, and I must say that I'm looking forward to meet him tomorrow, because the signals he sent, the way he sent the signals was open, and perhaps lively is the best word to express what we met when we.
Besides the formal diplomatic relationship, Sweden has a one-of-a-kind non-governmental organization called the Sweden-Korea Friendship Association. It was founded in 1969 by a group of idealistic Swedes who decided that Kim Il-sung's North Korea needed some friends in Scandinavia. Its mission statement writes that the group denounces US imperialism and wholeheartedly supports the Korean people's struggle for independence and national reunification. What a noble ideal! In practice, this meant unstoppably praising the kingdom's uncompromisingly socialist system and asserting its right to self-defense against hostile outsiders in the name of Juche. Over the decades, the Swedish-Korean Association became a Nordic fan club of the Generalissimo Kim Il-sung and a de facto PR agency for North Korea based in Stockholm. It hosts study circles on Juche ideology, organizes rallies and photo exhibitions extolling North Korean achievements, and arranges guided group tours to the socialist paradise. Since the 70s, it has been publishing quarterly magazines, essentially writing glossy love letters to the Kim's Korea. They selectively use UN data to show that North Korea's living standards are uniquely high given its weak economy. They highlighted that the DPRK's life expectancy and literacy are on par with, and sometimes better than, wealthy nations. Its members gather every year to make a birthday tribute to Kim Il-sung, collectively account for Pyongyang's construction feats, and denounce the US and the fake Korea for aggressive military drills. To them, North Korea is not a reclusive dictatorship, but a plucky nation heroically resisting colonialist bullying, a narrative they promote with dead serious conviction. The association's leaders have developed unusually cozy ties with the Kim regime. Longtime chairman Krista Lundgren boasts of visiting North Korea 5 times, and even meeting all 3 generations of the Kim family on their home turf. In 1983, Mr. Lundgren dined with great leader Kim Il-sung, and in later trips, he attended mass gatherings with Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un. Those were the rare red carpet treatments that very few Westerners had ever received.
60 years after the country was liberated from Japanese colonialism, the Korean people are still not united, and they are fighting for their unity with the forces of their own nation.
Lundgren emerged from these visits gushing that he had witnessed tremendous progress in the standard of living in Pyongyang. New high-rises, cell phones, plentiful food, in stark contrast to the fake famines reported by the UN. He insists most Western media coverage of North Korea is lies, exaggerations, and misunderstandings, American war propaganda. Such contrarian fervor earns the association frequent ridicule at home. Yet they proudly wear those labels as lapel pins of honor, convinced they see through Western bias to the real North Korea. And remarkably, the association remains untroubled by the Volvo embarrassment and all those not-so-legal activities North Korean diplomats conducted on Swedish soil. It has even acted as an apologist when North Korean officials got caught red-handed. A notorious case came in 2009. 2 North Korean diplomats were arrested in Stockholm after attempting to smuggle a huge stash of untaxed cigarettes via a ferry from Finland. Rather than condemn the crime, the Swedish-Korean Friendship Association blasted the Swedish authorities for daring to jail the men. They insisted Sweden had broken international law by not respecting the diplomatic immunity and defending Pyongyang smugglers as victims of Western perfidy. This absurd reversal of blame perfectly encapsulates the Friendship Association's outlook. In their deadpan logic, the Kims make no mistakes, and even when they do, it's probably someone else's fault. The Sweden-Korea Friendship Association has spent over 5 decades in a kind of ideological theatre, playing the role of Pyongyang's loyal cheerleader with a straight face. Despite the free Volvos, the Friendship Club marches on, waving the North Korean flag.
Leverage a Swedish source saying that the Swedes in those meetings of the past few days with the foreign minister have brought up this issue, that they haven't given any deadlines to the North Koreans, but they said that this could really be helpful in pushing forward things into the right direction, quote, which means, of course...
Walk into the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang today, and you'll find a modest office that handles an outsized share of other nations' business. Since the US, Canada, Australia, and many others have no diplomatic presence in North Korea, Sweden serves as their protecting power and de facto consular representative in Pyongyang. In practice, this means that when an American tourist is detained for unwittingly committing a crime in North Korea, or when an Australian finds themselves in trouble there, it's Swedish diplomats who step in to help. Sweden has a standing arrangement to look after the interests of at least 6 countries in North Korea, a very unique diplomatic babysitting job that it has fulfilled for decades. This role has earned Sweden a reputation as the West's emergency hotline to Pyongyang. For instance, when US college student Otto Warmbier was arrested in Pyongyang in 2016 for allegedly taking down a propaganda poster, it was Swedish embassy staff who repeatedly sought access to him in prison. They worked behind the scenes to negotiate his release. Also in 2017, Canadian pastor Hyun-Soo Lim, who had been held in North Korea for over 2 years, was suddenly released and allowed to return home. Again, the world should thank Sweden's quiet diplomacy. That same summer, Sweden helped facilitate the release of 3 American citizens of Korean descent who had been imprisoned in the North on dubious charges. Time and again, when Westerners became de facto hostages of the North Korean regime, it was Sweden that went to bail them out for their freedom. One could say the Swedish embassy in Pyongyang functions almost like a hostage office. They have to balance empathy with firmness, knowing lives can hang in the balance. It's a heavy responsibility for a small mission.
On the surface, Dugard's behavior seems bizarre, but it's typical of a psychological phenomenon known as Stockholm Syndrome. Victims of Stockholm Syndrome develop compassion and loyalty towards their captors. The condition follows psychologically traumatizing situations like hostage situations and kidnappings. In fact, Stockholm Syndrome got its name in 1973 when two thieves accosted a bank in Stockholm, Sweden, taking 4 bank employees hostage.
To understand this peculiar Cold War inversion of Stockholm Syndrome, we'd better call it the Pyongyang Syndrome. It's a psychological complex describing those Western liberals who have developed a persistent admiration for authoritarian regimes they have never actually lived under. It is characterized by a deep emotional attachment to North Korea, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations of equality, order, and alternative modernity. Most common in Scandinavia during the 1970s and early 2000s, it tends to affect diplomats, left-wing activists, and anyone who once read too much Chomsky or Trotsky in a hammock. The syndrome's patient zero has undoubtedly been Sweden, the first Western country to establish formal diplomatic relations with the kingdom. So why did so many Swedes fall for the Pyongyang Syndrome? The first mechanism is psychological projection. Disillusioned by the Western Bloc after the Vietnam War, many Swedes began projecting their ideals onto countries they didn't, or perhaps couldn't, understand. North Korea became a mirror for their socialist hopes, a place where class had supposedly been abolished, where imperialism was resisted, and where people wore matching outfits in perfect ideological harmony. Then there is distance idealism. The further a utopia is from your brutalist apartments, the more perfect it seems. Few Swedes had ever been to North Korea, and those who did were taken on carefully curated tours of spotless schools and synchronized dance troupes. From afar, it resembled a successful welfare state with fewer elections. The less you knew, the better it looked. Third, cognitive dissonance. Once the friendship was established, all those inconvenient facts, such as labor camps, famines, and unpaid bills, had to be rationalized or glossed over. The Swedish-Korean Friendship Association has been mastering this art for decades. It published glowing magazines about North Korea's achievements, organized solidarity tours, and accused Western media of slander. They have been living in an alternative reality that they mentally created. And you can't wake up a person who is pretending to be asleep. Like most syndromes, Pyongyang Syndrome tells us more about the patient than the host. Swedes, long accustomed to order, transparency, and Volvo-grade morality, saw in North Korea not a dictatorship, but a distorted reflection of their own ideals. Streamlined, simplified, and devoid of capitalist greed. The irony, of course, is that in searching for a purer version of themselves, they embraced a regime that jailed dissonances, outlawed sarcasm, and banned all foreign influence. Remember, Pyongyang Syndrome is what happens when idealism outpaces information, and when faith in a fantasy outweighs evidence from reality. It is a condition still visible today, not just in Sweden, but in every libertarian who mistakes dictatorship for dignity and staged parades for social harmony. Be careful, comrade. Looking at it from afar, the Sweden-North Korea relationship is a bundle of contradictions held together by pragmatism. It started with lofty dreams of friendship and commerce, crashed into cold reality with an epic unpaid debt, yet transformed into a quiet partnership that persists to this day. Both sides have derived value from this odd bond, albeit in vastly different ways. For North Korea, Sweden has been useful as a diplomatic window to the West, a source of humanitarian aid when times were desperate, a mediator to relay messages or negotiate with enemies, and occasionally a supplier of niche goods. Even after the Volvo saga, Sweden was known to ship medical supplies and factory parts over the years, though always insisting on payment up front. North Korea often portrays itself as proudly self-reliant, yet it quietly accepted Sweden's help when needed, whether it was food aid in the 1990s or behind-the-scenes talks in neutral Stockholm. In Pyongyang's official rhetoric, Sweden is seldom criticized the way the US or South Korea are. If anything, North Korean state media has acknowledged Sweden's friendly stance at times. It's as close to goodwill as Pyongyang gets with a Western state. For Sweden, North Korea has been a test of its foreign policy principles, a decades-long exercise in maintaining dialogue under extreme conditions. There is a certain ironic pride in Stockholm about being able to say, "We never closed our door to Pyongyang." It has given Sweden a unique platform on the world stage, occasionally putting this small Nordic nation at the centre of big geopolitical moments. Swedish diplomats gained a reservoir of first-hand knowledge about North Korea that few others in the West have. And perhaps there is also a moral satisfaction. By staying engaged, Sweden has been able to mitigate a few worst-case scenarios, like freeing detainees and delivering life-saving aid, that might not have been possible otherwise. In a world of fraught East-West clashes, Sweden carved out a niche as a rare, honest broker with the Kim regime. That's no small feat, even if it came at the cost of a long, unpaid bill and the occasional gnashing of teeth. Sweden and North Korea are an odd couple on the global stage. The liberal Scandinavian welfare state and the totalitarian dynastic dictatorship, somehow entwined by historical circumstance. One might be tempted to laugh at the image of Swedish officials dutifully mailing invoices for 50-year-old Volvos into the void, or of North Korean bureaucrats driving those Volvos until their wheels literally fall off, as if to extract every last bit of value. It is darkly comic. But it also underlines a serious lesson about international relations. Patience and pragmatism can sometimes achieve what coercion and outrage cannot.